You are on a Viking longship, far out at sea. The year is somewhere in the late 9th century, though the exact date is lost to time. And the coastline you left behind this morning has long since disappeared behind low, rolling clouds. The north sea stretches out endlessly in all directions, grey and impenetrable, a surface that is rarely still. For you, and for the handful of men beside you, this is not unusual. Travel by sea is your livelihood, your link between distant settlements, and the only way to carry raided silver, timber, or furs back home. The sea is both your road and your enemy. The longship beneath your feet creaks and flexes with every movement of the waves, built from oak planks laid carefully edge to edge and fastened with iron rivets. It is designed to ride the water like a floating leaf, light and flexible. Its shallow keel allows you to sail ab river as easily as you can cross open seas, but that same design makes it vulnerable in stormy weather. When the swells begin to rise, the men exchange glances. They know the signs. The air has shifted. The gulls have disappeared. The faint wind of the morning has stiffened into something more insistent. Storms can arrive quickly on the Viking seas, sometimes without warning, sometimes with days of dread anticipation to survive. You and your crewmates must fall into the routine drilled into you on countless voyages. Each man has his place. Some begin bailing water from the bilged low space beneath the planks, because even in calm weather, the ship is never completely dry. Others secure the cargo, lashing down the bundles of wool, the barrels of salted fish, and the coiled ropes, because a single sliding weight in rough seas can destabilize the entire vessel. The steersman at the rear checks the great steering oar, fixed with strong leather straps. It must hold. If it breaks under strain, you will drift helplessly. The sails are the heart of the longship, woven from wool, sometimes treated with animal fat or resin to resist water. They are powerful but delicate in a storm. A full square sail catches the wind like a wall, driving the ship forward with astonishing speed. But in a gale, that same sail could snap the mast or pull the ship sideways into the trough of a wave. And so, at the first hint of danger, the sail is lowered and stowed. From this point forward, oars are your only power. The sea grows rougher. The long, rolling swells have begun to peak, white foam breaking at their tops. The bow of the ship rises steeply, then crashes down, sending cold spray across your face and soaking your wool tunic. Salt burns your eyes. The oarsmen grip their benches, steadying themselves, waiting for the order. Their job is not to outrun the storm, but to keep the ship facing into the waves, never sideways. Sideways means capsizing. Sideways means death. You row, not quickly, not with the furious pace of a raid or a chase, but steadily, rhythmically, keeping the prow aligned. The rhythm is everything. In, out, as the steersman calls over the roar of the wind. Your muscles ache, but you do not stop. The man beside you does not stop. The storm is a battle, not of weapons, but of endurance. The details of survival are boring in their repetition, but they are what determine life or death. Every few minutes, someone shouts over the thunder for the bailing bucket. The bilge fills quickly as waves crash across the deck. Cold water seeps between the planks. If it is not thrown out, it will drag the ship lower, making each wave more dangerous. Another man tends the ropes, checking the knots, because a single loosened lash can send a spar crashing across the rowers. There is little to do but endure. The men avoid speaking unless necessary, not because they are afraid, though fear gnaws at everyone in silence, but because shouting wastes strength. Their eyes are on the waves, on the rhythm of the oars, on the prow that must never fall sideways into the trough. Hours pass like this. The clouds press low, and rain lashes at your back. At times the horizon disappears entirely, the world reduced to grey water and darker grey sky, with no landmark or star to guide you. The Viking sailors knew no compass. Their navigation relied on memory, on the sun, on the stars, and sometimes on the flight of seabirds. In a storm, all of this is stripped away. You are not moving forward, not toward a destination, but simply fighting not to sink. The smell of wet wool and sweat hangs heavy in the air. Some men vomit into the sea, overcome by the endless heaving motion. Others close their eyes, pulling the oars by instinct, lips moving silently in prayers to Thor, to Engjerd, to any god who might hear. Above the wind, it is easy to forget that survival is not about a single dramatic choice, but about countless small ones. Each man's ability to keep rowing, to keep bailing, to keep holding the ropes, is what keeps the ship afloat. The storm does not end quickly. Night falls while it still rages. Darkness brings new dangers, for you cannot see the waves before they strike. The steersman relies only on the feel of the oar, the tilt of the ship beneath him, and the voices of the rowers. The storm has stripped the voyage down to its barest form: wood, water, muscle, and will. And yet, not every ship survives. The sagas that Vikings told around their fires often included men lost at sea, entire ships swallowed by sudden storms, their names remembered only because others spoke them aloud afterward. The details of those losses, how the ropes broke, how the masts snapped, how men clung to planks in icy water, were rarely recorded. They were simply understood as part of the risk of travel. For every ship that reached port, another might not return. As dawn begins to show faintly behind the clouds, the storm is not yet finished, but it has lessened. The men are exhausted, faces pale, eyes hollow, but they are alive. Your hands are blistered from the oar. Your back aches. The build still needs bailing. The sail will need to be inspected when the weather calms. But the ship still floats. The sea will not be conquered, only endured. The Vikings knew this with every voyage, that their survival was not guaranteed, that storms could erase them as easily as a footprint on wet sand. And yet they returned to the sea again and again, because their lives and livelihoods depended on it. But as you sit there, clutching the oar, salt crusting on your skin, one thought remains unresolved. How many more storms like this could you survive before the sea finally claimed you? The storm does not end all at once. You wake to the faint grey of dawn, your body stiff from rowing through the night. The sea is still unsettled, the waves rising and falling with a slow heaviness, as though the water itself is weary from the violence of the past hours. The rain has thinned into a cold mist, but the ship remains soaked, every surface slick with salt water. Your wool tunic, heavy and wet, clings to your skin. There is no time to rest. A storm may pass, but its aftermath carries its own dangers. The first task is to take stock. You look around at your companions, their faces pale and tired. Eyes are red-rimmed, some from seawater, some from exhaustion. The steersman raises his hand for silence. He begins a slow count of the men, pointing. One by one, relief passes over the crew. No one is missing. Not this time. The ship, however, has not escaped unscathed. A crack runs along one of the oarlocks, the wooden notch where an oar is braced. Another plank has shifted slightly, letting water seep in more quickly than before. The sail, rolled and bound during the storm, is heavy with rain and must be carefully dried before it can be used again, or it will rot. And the cargo, what little you carry this voyage, has been tossed about, some of it dampened despite the leather wrappings. The damage is not catastrophic, but every flaw on a longship can become a death sentence if left untended, so the work begins. Some men continue bailing water, passing buckets hand to hand, tossing the seawater back into the waves. Others take to repairing. One of the ship's carpenters kneels at the damaged plank, hammering in new caulking made of tarred wool and animal hair, pressing it into the seam with the blunt end of his knife. The sound is dull but steady, almost comforting. Each strike is not dramatic, but without it, the sea would find its way inside. The oarlock is mended by binding it with rope, a temporary fix until proper replacement can be carved. The oars themselves, long and heavy, are inspected for cracks. A broken oar means one less man pulling, and in rough seas, even a single oar missing can throw off the balance of the ship. The mast is checked, its bindings retightened. This work is mundane, repetitive, unglamorous, but it is what keeps the voyage alive. By midday, the sky has begun to clear. A pale sun shines weakly through thin clouds. You feel its warmth on your face, and for the first time since the storm began, you can breathe without the taste of salt spray on your lips. The sail is unfurled to dry, billowing gently in the light breeze. The longship creaks less now, though its scars remain. Navigation becomes the next concern. In calm seas, a Viking sailor looks to the sun or stars, to the direction of the wind, to the patterns of waves, even to the flight of birds. But after a storm, all certainty is gone. The winds have shifted, and you are no longer sure which way the coast lies. Some men argue quietly, pointing toward different horizons. One swears he saw the shadow of land before night fell. Another insists the gulls that circled before the storm must still be near. The steersman listens, but decides slowly. He has sailed these waters before and knows that hasty choices can lead to disaster. Instead, he orders the ship to follow the swell of the waves. The sea, after all, often remembers the direction of the wind long after the storm passes. By watching the pattern of swells, one can sometimes trace the direction back toward land. It is a skill learned over years, not written in books, but passed through practice and patience. As you row onward, time stretches. Days at sea are measured not by clocks but by tasks: bailing, rowing, tending ropes, eating, resting in shifts. Food is sparse but essential. You take from the storage dried fish, hard bread, a bit of salted meat. It is not pleasant, but it sustains. Water is rationed carefully. Rain is collected in skins when possible, for the barrels of fresh water carried aboard never lasts as long as hoped. Some voyagers bring ale, weaker than what is drunk at home. because it lasts longer than plain water without spoiling. But here, in the wake of a storm, every drop matters. The men eat in silence, their movements slow, conserving strength. One speaks of his farmstead back home, of the sheep he hopes survived the winter. Another mentions his wife, who will not know if he lives or has been swallowed by the sea until many months have passed. These words are not dramatic, but plain, a reminder of what waits beyond the waves. The ship continues. By evening, seabirds appear, white against the horizon. Relief stirs among the men. Birds rarely stray far from land, and their flight patterns can be followed like a map. Soon, a faint line rises against the distance. Land. Whether it is the coast they intended or not does not matter yet. It is land, and land means safety, rest, and the chance to repair properly. The shoreline comes into view slowly, hour after hour, until rocks and trees take shape. The longship is steered carefully toward a sheltered inlet. The men know better than to rush. Grounding on hidden rocks after surviving a storm would be the cruelest fate of all. At last, the keel scrapes sand, and the ship shudders to a stop in shallow water. The crew breathes out in relief. But the work is not over. Landing after a storm brings its own routine. The sail is lowered fully and spread across rocks to dry. The oars are carried ashore, laid out where the sun can harden them again. Every piece of the ship is inspected anew, from the smallest peg to the largest beam. Wet ropes are coiled and left to dry, for damp rope breeds rot and weakness. The men move with weary familiarity, each knowing his role. They do not celebrate. Not yet. Survival at sea is never certain until the next voyage begins. That night, a fire is kindled on the shore. Fish are caught and roasted, and the men eat more heartily than they have in days. Laughter even returns, cautious but real. They speak of the storm now that it is past, each man recalling the wave that nearly swamped the ship, or the moment he thought his oar would snap. The telling of the tale is itself a ritual, a way of giving shape to the chaos they endured. And as the fire burns low, you are left with a quieter thought. Storms will always return. Repairs can be made, supplies replenished, but the sea remains unpredictable. How many voyages ended not with laughter around a fire, but with silence, the ship never reaching shore? The sagas tell of heroes, but what of the countless ordinary sailors whose names are lost, whose final moments were spent not in battle but in the endless, boring work of bailing, rowing, and enduring? Perhaps the truest survival was not in the storm itself, but in what followed, the careful tending of wood and rope, the dull but vital tasks that kept the sea from claiming yet another life. But if storms were so common, and survival depended on so many tedious labors, how did Viking sailors find the courage to set out again and again into such dangerous waters? The storm has passed, and the longship rests safely in a shallow cove. The crew sleeps deeply, their bodies curled on the sand or on planks dragged ashore. For the first time in days, the sound of waves is no longer a threat, but a steady lullaby. The wind has calmed, and the gulls wheel overhead, their calls sharp against a quiet morning. Yet survival at sea never ends with the first moment of safety. In the days that follow, the crew works slowly but deliberately, transforming their fragile reprieve into a chance for renewal. The ship is examined plank by plank. The hull turns slightly on its side with the help of logs to expose the underbelly to air and sun. The men scrape away barnacles and check for damage unseen from above. Resin is melted over a small fire, the thick pitch poured carefully into seams to seal them once more. The smell is pungent, sticky, clinging to your hands, but it is the smell of survival. The sail is spread flat across the ground, stretched out to dry completely. Men rub it with animal fat to restore some of its water resistance. The ropes are rebraided, frayed ends trimmed, knots retied. Each task is boring in itself, repetitive and methodical, but every one of them is what makes another voyage possible. A ship neglected is a ship doomed. The sea allows no shortcuts. Food and water are another concern. The stores were soaked during the storm, some spoiled beyond use. Men take to fishing with nets and hooks, gathering shellfish along the shore, even digging for edible roots in the damp soil behind the beach. Rainwater is collected in skins, supplemented by small streams trickling into the cove. This is not wealth, not plunder, not glory only, the quiet, necessary work of keeping men alive until the next leg of the journey can begin. At night, around the fire, conversation shifts. The storm is still spoken of, but now in a different tone. Men tell the tale, not with dread, but with pride, reshaping fear into endurance. Already it becomes a story, the wave that nearly swamped the bow, the hours of rowing in the dark, the moment the mast threatened to snap. In telling it, they bind themselves together. Storms are not just endured, they are remembered, reshaped into lessons, warnings, and, eventually, sagas. But beneath the pride lies a truth no man speaks aloud. The storm has changed them. Some men now look to the horizon with hesitation. Others mutter quiet prayers before they sleep, hands tracing runes carved into pendants or small wooden figures of gods. To sail again is inevitable, but each knows that the sea does not forgive. They have survived once, but will they always? The long-term impact of such voyages reaches far beyond the shoreline where they repair their ship. For the Vikings, the sea was not only a road, but the very heart of their expansion. Across the North Sea, across the Baltic, down the rivers of Eastern Europe, even across the open Atlantic to Iceland and Greenland, they carried their goods, their families, their hopes, and their fears. Every settlement, every trade, every raid depended upon these journeys. Without men willing to face the storms, there would have been no Viking Age as we know it. And yet, it was not the grand battles or the fierce raids alone that made this possible. It was also the unglamorous endurance of sailors who spent weeks at sea, repeating the same motions, tending to the same repairs, bailing the same build. History remembers kings and jarls, names etched into sagas and chronicles, but the countless nameless rowers are forgotten. Their lives were measured in storms, survived, coasts sighted, and cargo delivered. The storms themselves shaped the rhythm of Viking life. Settlements along the coasts often measured time not only by seasons of harvest, but by the safe windows for sailing. Spring brought calmer seas, summer the long voyages, autumn the hasty returns before winter closed the waters with storms and ice. Families lived with uncertainty. A man who left on a voyage might not return for months or at all. Women kept farms and households running, never knowing if the next storm would make them widows. Children grew up hearing the stories of the sea, learning early that survival was not certain, that the ocean took as easily as it gave. These boring details went to sail. How to mend a hull, how to ration water, became the true backbone of Norse expansion. Without them, no raid would reach foreign shores. No trade would connect distant markets. No settlement would take root on rocky islands far from home. The storm you survived is not just one storm. It is one among countless storms that tested the endurance of a people and shaped the edges of their world. Consider the settlements in Iceland, Greenland, even Vinland across the Atlantic. Each was reached not by kings, but by ordinary crews who endured weeks of uncertain weather. Some ships never arrived, their names unrecorded. Others limped ashore, battered, their survival owed entirely to the dull persistence of men who rowed, bailed, repaired, and prayed. The sagas later turned these voyages into tales of bravery, but the reality was often monotonous struggle. The memory of storms also influenced belief. The gods of the Norse pantheon were not abstract ideas, but living forces tied to survival. Thor's hammer was invoked not only for victory in battle, but for protection against thunder and lightning. Engerd, god of the sea, was praised in offerings for calm waters. Ran, the sea goddess who gathered drowned men in her net, was feared as much as worshipped. Every storm reminded sailors of their fragility before such powers. Each survival reinforced the rituals, the offerings, the carved runes and whispered prayers that accompanied voyages. As your repaired ship is pushed once more into the water, its keel sliding over wet sand, you feel both dread and determination. The sea still waits. Another voyage will come, another storm, another test of endurance. The men take up their oars again, hands calloused, backs bent, the rhythm returning as if it had never been interrupted. They know the risk. They know the sea may yet claim them, and still they go. It is easy, centuries later, to imagine Vikings only as warriors, helmets, axes, battles. But to survive a storm on the Viking seas was as much a part of their world as any raid. Without these countless, anonymous acts of endurance, the raids, the trade, the settlements, the entire story of Viking expansion would vanish like foam on the waves. And so, the resolution of this tale is not a triumphant victory, but a quiet truth. The Vikings endured, not because of their glory, but because of their patience with the sea. Their attention to the boring, necessary details that kept their ships afloat. In the end, their survival was not measured by the storms they conquered, but by the storms they endured long enough to tell the tale. As you sit once more with your hands on the oar, the question lingers: how many storms can a people face before the sea finally claims more than it allows? And was the price of that endurance the countless, nameless lives lost worth the reach that carried the Vikings so far from home?